Coming up on this episode of Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS, our old friend Corbin Smith, Seahawks beat reporter, all Seahawks, Locked On Seahawks. You know him. You love him. He's going to help recap the season for us with his inside information covering the team up close all year long. How does he think Mike Macdonald did in his first season as a coach? And what does he think his style is? He has some fascinating things to say about how he approaches coaching this football team. John Schneider. Is his seat hot? What does he have to do this offseason to get back in the good graces of Seahawks fans? We'll break down everything on both sides of the ball and talk about the all-pro team that came out today. Is it an indication that this roster isn't quite as good as we thought it would be? And then I suppose at some point we'll talk about the quarterback position because a few of you may want us to. Corbin Smith joins me next.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Head over to BetUS, sign up for a new account today. They'll give you a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your second and third deposits. All of their point spreads are up for the NFL playoffs this weekend. They have live betting throughout the games and a full menu of prop bets as well. Head on over there, sign up for your new account. Use the promo code YouTube150 to take advantage of this deal. All right, it's always great to have Corbin on. He works so hard, and he does such a great job covering the team. He came out with a piece. We touch on it in this interview. I encourage you to go to All Seahawks. I'll link it in the description to make it easy on you, where he has some sourced information on what kind of went on behind the scenes in regards to the Ryan Grubb situation, his job status throughout the season and leading up to his firing. Absolutely check that out. Hit that thumbs up button on the YouTube channel, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notification of future episodes. All the other ways you can support the channel are down in the description. Let's get right to it. This is the conversation I had moments ago with Corbin Smith. Corbin, always good to have you on. It just seems like yesterday that we were getting together and previewing the season and looking forward to what we thought Mike Macdonald would accomplish as a first-year head coach in the NFL. Taking a step back now, the full view of his first season in the NFL as a head coach, running the show. What's your assessment of his performance?
I'd be leaning towards a success, and I'm not going to sit here and say it's a roaring success because they missed the playoffs, and this is a bottom-line business. You make the postseason or you don't. So that was obviously a big thing that was missing from this first year for Mike Macdonald. And he mentioned that on Tuesday that, hey, we didn't make the postseason. We didn't make the dance. That is obviously the biggest feather that you got to have in your cap. But at the same time, everything else that Mike Macdonald was brought in to do, replacing Pete Carroll, he accomplished. This defense became a top 10 defense the last 7 games. They went 5-2 in large part because that defense carried this football team. Some of the decisions that he made, such as completely shuffling out his linebackers in the middle of the season, putting Josh Jobe in the starting lineup off the practice squad, keeping Kobe Bryant in the starting lineup, those decisions all panned out. And that's what made this defense a top 10 unit down the stretch. He's got players bought in. He's got coaches bought in. And if you aren't bought in, you're going to be out the door. And that's both players and coaches, as we have seen this week. And I think the other thing that you have to look at is that he was able to come in and not only maintain the culture that Pete Carroll had, but he's been able to put his own stamp on it. So I think when you consider those things, this year has been a success. And then you add in the fact that they went 4-2 in the division, and he got a win against all 3 coaches in the NFC West this year. Pete Carroll went 2-4 last season against those NFC West foes. So that is another check mark that he was able to get. So obviously missing the playoffs, that's a big blow to the franchise. They really thought they were going to be going to the postseason. They had opportunities to get there. But I think overall, especially for a first-time head coach at any level, especially the NFL, I think that this was a successful season for Mike Macdonald.
Yeah, I think I saw the other day, only 21 times in NFL history, a 10-win team has been left out of the dance. The Seahawks have actually done it twice. Very, very close to getting there. Certainly. I think another part of Pete Carroll's legacy that he's maintained is when he's sitting behind the podium, he's on the coach's show, he's presenting himself to the public, he seems very laid back, very calm, very thoughtful and easygoing. but behind closed doors, he's pretty tenacious, right? We saw what he did with that linebacker room. You referenced that. I mean, when he saw that something needed to be fixed, he just fixed it. And there was the article that came out on ESPN earlier in the year about in the preseason when he was challenging some of his rookies, that one in particular that failed a conditioning test. He was threatening to cut him. What's your sense of his style as he's grown into the role of head coach?
He's calculated but ruthless. That's what I would call Mike Macdonald. I think that he is an extremely intelligent football mind, and I think as long as you're doing what you need to do, you're doing your job. If you're somebody like Devin Witherspoon that just eats, sleeps, breathes football, you've got nothing to worry about. Those kind of guys are going to – you could tell Mike Macdonald worked for Jim Harbaugh and John Harbaugh because that's how those guys are programmed. I remember Jim Harbaugh in his Chargers press conference talking about, he's like, I'm just a football guy. You know, I love football, and players that love football love me. That's the kind of coach that Mike Macdonald is. And I think, you know, if you're coming in failing conditioning tests, that immediately is a red flag. Do you love football? Because people that love football do the work in the off season so that they can go out and they can excel at football. That's what they do. And so I think you're looking at a guy that, again, he's calculated with what he does. He's measured, but he can be ruthless. We saw it with the linebackers. Hey, it's a business. You guys weren't doing what I want. You're gone. Ryan Grubb now, the offensive coordinator. You weren't doing what I wanted. You're gone. So he is very confident in his convictions, and he can be ruthless in that. But look, Bill Belichick was as ruthless as any coach that's ever lived. He's got 6 Super Bowl rings. So right. I think there's a way you can balance that. Players like him a lot, but you better come in ready to go. You better be passionate, and you better put the work in behind the scenes, both physically and mentally, or you're not going to be around very long.
Yeah, Ryan Grubb certainly understands that now. The former University of Washington offensive coordinator, first year making the leap to the NFL. There was a lot of support for this move when it happened because of his ties here and because of what he accomplished, and I think because of the way the press really liked him. Those that have dealt with him, he's a really amiable guy, and I really enjoyed listening to him talk about football. But it just didn't work out. But I wanted to ask you, as you covered the team throughout the season, at what point did you start to think a change like this was possible? When the clock went to 0 in LA last Sunday, did you think Grubb was safe for 2025?
So I'll answer the second question first. Absolutely not. I was going to be really surprised if Ryan Grubb had a job past Wednesday this week. And the reason is because when I started to think that this was going to happen, and you can look at the receipts, and I know a lot of my listeners on Locked On Seahawks, a lot of my readers on Seahawks on SI have already been commenting on this over the past few days. Obviously, I dropped the article Monday with just a ton of chronicle information about how this season went down. But I thought that this was potentially going to happen after that Week 5 loss to the Giants. You don't want to overreact to one loss, but I had some conversations coming out of that game that made me think there's some things that are off here. And we all knew going into this that if Ryan Grubb was not able to adapt his system enough from what he did in college, he was not going to be able to throw the ball 85% of the time and find consistent success in the NFL. The problem was that he was too stubborn about that, and it ended up being his undoing. And you could see it in Week 5 there with 7 carries for the running backs the entire game. 87% of their plays were pass plays against the Giants, who came in with the 16th ranked run defense. They just didn't even make a conscious effort to try to run the football in that game. They scored 13 points on offense. And a big reason why is because there was no complimentary football being played. So look, I don't know whether or not this team was considering moving on at the bye week, but I would not have been surprised based on some of the things that have been told to me even earlier in the year. This seemed like something where Ryan Grubb was going to have to really have a fantastic second half to ensure he was going to be back, and that did not happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, if you guys haven't read that article, definitely go check it out at All Seahawks. Incredibly well-written, sourced piece. Kudos to you. It's been fun watching your career develop, and then a piece like this comes out. This is the kind of stuff you see on ESPN, my friend. So good work.
Thank you.
So now what's next for the offensive coordinator position? There was a lot of speculation, maybe Jake Peetz, who comes from the Sean McVay tree, at least recently, might be in line. Mike Macdonald said in-house promotions are not under consideration right now. We do have some reported interviews so far. This is what we have. Thomas Brown, who enjoyed quite the ride up the roller coaster from the Bears this year, working his way to offensive coordinator when Waldron was fired, and then interim head coach when they moved on from Matt Eberflus. Hank Fraley, offensive line coach for the Lions, and Klint Kubiak, part of that staff in New Orleans that's in limbo right now, but he is most certainly available. Your thoughts on that list, first of all?
First of all, I like all three of these coaches. Now, when I came out with my preliminary 9 candidates, 2 of these guys were not on there, but they fit the mold of the type of coaches that I expected the Seahawks were going to be looking at. It turns out that's the case. But Hank Fraley is very similar to Adam Stenavich from the Green Bay Packers in that he is an offensive line coach that hasn't been a play caller at the NFL level, even though Stenavich is the offensive coordinator for Green Bay. Matt LaFleur is the one that calls plays. So he's still not a play caller. He's really a glorified offensive line coach that has some involvement in the play calling duties. But those 2 guys have been in the league for a while. They played in the NFL. Fraley had the more successful NFL career, but both these guys spent time in the league, so they understand what it takes to be able to be successful. And both of them are well respected by players. And Fraley was one of the few guys that was kept on board from the previous staff when Dan Campbell came in. Dan Campbell listened to his players because that's what he does. Listen to his players who were vouching for this guy. And all the Lions have had the last 3 years is a top 3 offensive line every single year. They keep guys off of Jared Goff. They run the living daylights out of the football, and they do it as well as anybody. And this is a guy that played 11 years in the NFL. So I'm not surprised that he is a name that popped up because, like Stenavich, again, that background, I'm excited they're leaning on some offensive line background with these guys because certainly this is a coach that would help from that perspective. And Thomas Brown, I've seen a lot of negativity revolving around that name because he's coming from Chicago. But Dan, I want you to think about what this guy has gone through this year. He opened the season as the pass game coordinator. Chicago actually was throwing the ball pretty well early in the season. And then after November 10th, Shane Waldron gets the can. They put Thomas Brown in. The next 3 weeks, they play the Packers, Lions, and Vikings in consecutive weeks, all playoff teams. They lost all those games by less than a score. And the offense averaged 22 points a game, which might not seem impressive, but they averaged 18 for the season. So he was getting the offense at least moving in a positive direction. And then they decide, well, Matt Eberflus manages the play clock like a 3-year-old on Madden, so we're going to fire him. And they plug Thomas Brown into that role as the interim coach. And now you're saying, well, not only do we want you to call plays, but now you need to juggle everything else that goes with being a head coach with all the other stuff that's going on. I know the Bears offense was dreadful down the stretch. We saw it in that 6-3 win for the Seahawks where neither team could do anything on offense. But I think what Thomas Brown did was actually pretty darn commendable. And he was the assistant head coach for Sean McVay on the Rams a couple of years, including the year they won the Super Bowl. He is a very respected coach. He's been a running back coach. He's coached tight ends. He's been a pass game coordinator. Obviously, he's a running back. He knows the run game inside and out. I think Thomas Brown would be a really good hire. But of those 3, Klint Kubiak is the one that I think would be the best fit for this. I just think he is cut from the same cloth as Mike Macdonald. He comes from a background where football is life. This guy is a football nerd. He has been in the league for 11 years, and he's only 37 years old. I mean, that tells you all you need to know. Yeah. And some people are going to say, well, it's because his dad was a Super Bowl winning coach, and he got his foot in the door. But look, the guy's a good coach in his own right. New Orleans scored more than 40 points in each of their first 2 games this year, and then they couldn't keep anybody healthy. Their quarterback missed a bunch of games. Their offensive line was basically playing second and third stringers. They were down to their 4th and 5th string receivers for a good chunk of the season. What was he supposed to do? I think what Klint Kubiak did, the fact that they were in a position to win the season finale against the Buccaneers is admirable when you consider what he was going out there. Didn't have Alvin Kamara at that point either. Yeah. So I look at him and I think what he did with Kirk Cousins in 2021, they were 9th. The Vikings were in touchdown passes. Their run game was in the middle of the pack, but he is from the Shanahan-Kubiak tree. He understands the value of running the football. He connects with players. I think Klint Kubiak would be a home run to put with Geno Smith. As far as these 3, to me, seeing what he did as a pass game coordinator with Brock Purdy last year, I think Geno Smith's strengths would be accentuated best in his system, a guy that's already been a play caller for a couple of teams.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool list so far. I like it because, and you leaned into this a little bit, it does expose an identity that they're looking for. You know, the things that they've talked about wanting, they've clearly gone out and targeted guys that have that sort of background. Fraley's cool because, like, I would encourage anyone to just Google him and see a picture of this dude. Like, you look at this guy and you immediately go, yeah, he's going to run the football. Like,
oh yeah,
you know, that's what he's going to do. What I find interesting about him as well, and I think we've reached that point with this Detroit Lions organization now where they're going to get rated this offseason, their coaching staff, however long they're alive, if they go all the way to the Super Bowl or whatever. Like, you know, we know Ben Johnson's probably gone. Like, he might bring Tanner Engstrand with him. There's a bunch of guys on that. Aaron Glenn's going to get one of these head coaching jobs, right? It's like everybody wants a piece of that. He has already reportedly started to reach out to potential candidates to come with him if he gets a coordinator job. In particular, it's been reported that he has guys in mind for passing coordinator. There's a really interesting guy on that Lions staff who people in the Northwest are familiar with. He's a quarterback.
I think I mentioned this yesterday.
Mark Brunell. Like, he'd be an obvious tie-in, wouldn't he, to maybe bring him back to the Northwest?
That's one name, but I posted the other one, and this is the one that Seahawks fans are familiar for the wrong reasons. But Antoine Randall, the receiver that threw the touchdown in Super Bowl 40, he's the receiver coach in Detroit, and he is quickly climbing up coaching ladders. Antoine Randall would also be a candidate that I fully would be expecting that is going to be on that list. If you're looking at in-house candidates, so to speak, that Fraley could bring with him, Antoine Randall would be one that absolutely would make a lot of sense. And you look at what the receivers have done there. I mean, he's been there all the seasons that Amon-Ra St. Brown has been there. So he's been instrumental in his development. Jameson Williams now coming along. That kind of stuff, I think we put too much into, has the guy been a play caller before? Has he done this or that? You got to look at the ability to reach players and the ability to develop guys, especially when you're talking about position coaches. And so the fact of the matter is, Fraley has done that with every dude that's come in there in Detroit. He knows how to build buffet bashers there in Detroit. And then Antoine Randall, the receivers have been fantastic. They've had injuries galore there a couple of years in the past, and they just keep humming guys out there that can play. So that is a positive viewpoint on Randall. So I think him and Brunell, I mean, heck, why not bring both of them with you? Like you said, Dan Campbell might have an empty fridge by the time this is over with and have to go grocery shopping because everybody wants a piece of this. But those are two names that would make a lot of sense from in-house. And I'm sure Fraley's got connections with other teams around the league as well, where he can start fielding some offers from other guys. Hey, if I get this job, will you come with me? This is a smart football guy, so I'm sure he knows what he's looking for.
And whoever they hire is going to have to bring someone with them. The Seahawks have already lost Zach Hill to Boise State, an offensive assistant. Charles London is interviewing elsewhere. You know, and while Mike Macdonald said Scott Huff is a Seahawk for now, you have to imagine any coordinator might have his own ideas of who to bring with him as an offensive line coach, especially someone who's been an offensive line coach for so long. One thing about a guy like Fraley or Senovich or some of these other candidates on the list that have never called plays at the NFL level, I know the immediate concern if they hire someone like that among the fan base is going to be, well, wait a minute. We just watched a guy flame out because he had never called plays at the NFL level before. Why should we believe now that someone else who hasn't done it at all, actually, not even at the college level, is someone that I should believe in? How would you alleviate those concerns?
So the first thing that I would say is that Ryan Grubb's issue was not his football intelligence or his ability to scheme plays up. That was not really the big issue for Ryan Grubb. The problem was that the way he was deploying his schemes and the offensive philosophy, for one thing, it just butted heads with what Mike Macdonald wanted to do. But second, it just, like I said, those pass-heavy offenses with 90% shotgun, like, they don't work in the NFL. They might work for a couple of games, but teams are going to catch up, and they just don't work. The inability to play complementary football, it wasn't scheming as much as how those schemes were utilized. And I can tell you this, when you look at Stenovich, you look at Fraley, these guys have been around really good play callers. They're going to understand the game well enough from their playing background. They're going to understand the game well enough to know the scheme stuff. But what they're going to be able to do, those guys are going to be able to craft game plans that are catered to attacking NFL defenses because they've been NFL coaches for a number of years. They're not college only guys. And I'm not saying that those kind of coaches can't find success in the NFL, but you have to be able to make adaptations because college offenses, as they are constructed, don't work at the pro level without some adaptation. And Ryan Grubb just didn't do that. I am 100% confident that Stenavich and Fraley would know how to build an NFL offense. I am 100% confident on that.
We're going to come back and talk about some other things on offense because there's certainly some issues and questions there on many fans' minds. But let's talk about the defense. I want to start here. What is it about Leonard Williams that he's just not getting the respect he deserves? Here's your tweet from earlier today as it was revealed. The AP All-Pro team, the official All-Pro team came out today, and he's not even second team despite leading, like you say here. I mean, Leonard Williams has one Pro Bowl and never been to an All-Pro in his career. You can make a very strong argument there isn't a more criminally underrated defender in the NFL today. He leads interior defensive linemen in this year in sacks, quarterback hits and tackles for loss, I believe. What is it
He's
about
got the
Leonard
Triple Crown, Dan?
Yeah.
Listen, I think we use the term snub way too much. It's kind of like generational talent. Way too many people throw that term around. There's a reason it's supposed to be like once in a generation. I see players on draft season, multiple players every. I'm like, no, that's not using that term right. And I think when you're looking at Pro Bowl and All-Pro snubs, a lot of times it feels like, okay, you're talking about comparing two very deserving players. And I don't want to take anything away from Jalen Carter and some of the other guys that ended up getting All-Pro votes. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that Leonard Williams was the most disruptive defensive lineman in the NFL this year. No offense to Cameron Hayward. No offense. Chris Jones had a good season, but by his standards, it was not a great season. Leonard Williams was the most complete defensive lineman in the NFL this year by a pretty wide gap. And it's not just stats. You turn on tape and you watch these guys. These guys are really good players, but Leonard Williams, I think, deserves to be in consideration for Defensive Player of the Year, let alone being an All-Pro selection. I mean, the guy just watch the two Arizona games just as an example. Like it got to the point they were doubling him regularly, and it didn't matter. He was still finding ways to get to Kyler Murray and still blow up plays in the backfield. His instincts, how Mike Macdonald and his staff moved him all over the line, really capitalized on his flexibility, his versatility as a player. And again, he had that Triple Crown. He led all defensive linemen in sacks, quarterback hits, and tackles for a loss. Like that by itself, I don't need to even watch the film then. Like that dude should at least be second team All-Pro. It is a travesty that he was not a first team All-Pro selection, though, because to me, he was the best interior defender. I don't know what it is. Maybe he's just too nice of a guy off the field, but it was refreshing to hear. I don't want to say that I like hearing people be frustrated, but when he was frustrated about not making a Pro Bowl roster, you can understand why, because this guy has been a great to elite level player for a long time, and he played for really bad teams. He played for a 10-win Seahawks team that would have made the playoffs most years, and he still doesn't make the All-Pro team. I just don't get it. I forgot to mention he had a 92-yard touchdown on an interception, too. I mean, the guy, he put up numbers that we have not seen defensive linemen put up since the merger in 1970, and he's not an All-Pro. I just do not understand it.
Yeah, I don't either. A lot of times, a player will get overlooked that the eye test, we all know they're a great player, but maybe they just don't fill up the stat sheet. But he did that, right? He checked that box. He has draft pedigree. He was a high draft pick. He's signed 3 huge contracts. He's never been overlooked before. Everybody knows who he is. And oh, by the way, he's a great dude too. Like this guy doesn't do anything off the field
he is just as good of a person as he is a player. And if you saw this year, that means he's a pretty damn good person.
Yeah. But it brings me to a concept that we talked about it last offseason. We're still talking about it even after a season in which we feel like a bunch of young players on this roster took a step forward. The lack of blue chip players, right? Nobody else got votes for All-Pro. They're hardly represented in the voting on this team, even though, those of us that cover the team or just watch the team, are fans of the team, believe that there's a ton of young talent, really, really good young talent on this team. Some of it, I thought, heading into this season had a chance to ascend to that level. It's still not happening. How How do you put a finger on that? How do we reconcile the fact that there's so much talent on this roster, but maybe none of it's elite?
See, I would push back against that thought from what I saw the last 7 games, because you have players like Devin Witherspoon, and Witherspoon did get 16 points in the voting for slot corner. So at least Devin Witherspoon was somewhat represented here. And the problem is, Spoon didn't have any sacks this year, or he had 1 sack. He didn't have any interceptions. Yeah. So the impact plays.
He's that guy I was talking about that. Yeah, we all see it. He just doesn't fill up the stat sheet.
But you watch the games and you see some of the ridiculous plays that this dude makes week in and week out. I mean, he got to DeAndre Swift in that Bears game for a 7-yard tackle for loss on a toss play, a slot cornerback. Like, he does things that no other slot corner in the NFL is going to do. And teams know that. They game plan for this guy. How many slot corners can you say that about? Like, teams game plan for Devin Witherspoon. So I thought he played at an elite level, even if the production didn't match up. If you watch the games, you saw that. He sometimes got put in tough spots in coverage, too, with some of the stuff they were doing. But playing slot corner is as hard as any position in the NFL in today's game. And, I think he plays it as well as anybody. And Julian Love, you take out there were a couple bad coverage reads this year that might have ultimately hung into the minds of AP voters. And he also had a lot of guys that had more interceptions than him. He did have 3, but I thought Julian Love played at an elite level most of this season. And I thought that the linebackers, particularly Ernest Jones after coming over, I thought he played at an elite level. And this defense, they went from being 30th against the run, end of the year 16th. A big reason that they made that massive jump in the last 7-8 games is because of number 13 in the middle. I think there's definitely some elite level talent on this defense, and there's some really good players that aren't quite to that level yet. The fact of the matter is that aside from the Green Bay game, and really that was just for a quarter, the first quarter was trash, but the rest of that second half, this was a defense that generally played really good football. I think you started to see them put together. They could do that for an entire season. I think you have a different all-pro voting in terms of, I don't know if Leonard Williams gets in, because it just seems like 10 years and he's had 1 Pro Bowl and no all-pros. I don't know what is going on there. My brain can't compute that. But I do think if you saw this defense be a top 10 unit for an entire season, that some of the real talented players that they have would start to get that recognition.
There's some decisions to be made on that side of the ball when it comes to managing the salary cap. Right now, the Seahawks, with the updated projection on over the cap of what the cap's going to be, the Seahawks are basically even as we sit here today, going into next season. They got a couple of guys that played huge roles up front, especially on this team. Draymond Jones, Roy Robertson Harris. The Ernest Jones thing, I think he even kind of let the cat out of the bag after the game on Sunday and sort of confirmed to us all that he intends to get a deal done and stay here long term. But there's some guys, and Jaron Reed's another one who was on an expiring contract but played really well this year. Of those 3, how many of those do you see coming back next year?
I think Roy Robertson Harris is going to be a cap casualty. I think that they made that trade under the impression that he was going to be a rental for the rest of the season. I mean, he's got a huge cap hit for a guy that isn't going to get you a lot of sacks. And I thought he did some good things for him, but maybe they rework the contract too. That's a possibility. He's not going to be on this roster with the contract currently how it is.
But none of it's guaranteed. It would be, if he wants to be here, I would think there's an opportunity there to do something.
For him to rework that, absolutely. But I also, look, Draymond Jones, I don't think was bad this year. I think that he had some games where he showed up more than others. The Atlanta game, he was the best player on the field. The problem is that there's just too many games where he just kind of goes AWOL and he goes ghost mode. With the money that he's due, I don't see any way Draymond Jones is on this roster next year. And I think Mike Macdonald is going to be able to go out and find somebody at a cheaper price that can fill that role. I just don't think that this deal worked out the way that the Seahawks hoped. Maybe that's another one. They can come up with some type of a solution with the contract, but I don't even know if that's going to be happening. I feel like Mike Macdonald's probably like, hey, I can go draft somebody that can fill that. Or maybe Mike Morris now can fill that role for this team or whatever. I just don't think at the price tag there that I would expect that he's going to be back. Jaron Reed, to me, has got to be a priority. I would put him right behind Ernest Jones, and I think he wants to finish his career here. I don't think you have to break the bank to re-sign Jaron Reed. I think at this stage, like, I've made my money. I played for Green Bay and Kansas City.
Yeah.
I want to finish
You
my
loved it
career here and see if I can get this team back to a Super Bowl. I think you can get that done. I'd try to see if we can get another 2 or, I wouldn't be crazy to give him a 3-year deal because defensive tackles age pretty well generally compared to other positions. I think Jarran Reed still got at least 2 or 3 good years left in him. I think that behind Ernest Jones, he would be my second one because I thought him and Big Cat together was a really fun combination for a full season.
And then it was obviously a frustrating year and a half, really, for Uchenna Nwosu. He was able to come back and be healthy at the end of the year. Looked like he was starting to round back into form. It was just a little bit too little too late. But if you move on from Jones and you save that money, that would seem to open the door for Nwosu continuing on as well.
I think that the locker room would riot if Uchenna Nwosu got released. That is my opinion based on conversations I've had with players on the team. And not that they'd be happy that Draymond Jones is cut. You don't wish any of that kind of stuff. But I think because of the misfortune, think about it. The knee injury in the preseason, that was just a really dirty block by the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah.
So Uchenna Nwosu's had some bad luck injuries more than anything. And you saw what he's capable of the last few games once he had really gotten his feet back underneath him. I think that if you're looking to open up money, Draymond Jones is the guy you do that with. He's replaceable to me. Uchenna Nwosu, when he's healthy, is the best defensive end that this team has. No offense to Boye Mafe and Derek Hall, but Uchenna Nwosu is just a better all-around player. He is a locker room leader. Again, I think that there would be a risk of alienating the locker room if you decided to move on from him, given circumstances.
And then how do you feel about the cornerback position? Because I feel like this doesn't get talked about enough as we head into draft season and people are talking about needs and wants and things of that nature. Devin Witherspoon had to play outside a bunch the last couple of weeks because of injuries. Reek Woolen got banged up. Josh Jobe was a revelation, as you mentioned, coming up from the practice squad, earning a starting spot. Trey Brown's on an expiring deal. Some fans want Reek to be traded, whatever. I don't think that's happening. But is cornerback a bigger need than maybe people are talking about?
I think it's like last year where a day 3 pick could make some sense, but I really liked the starting lineup of Reek Woolen, Devin Witherspoon, and Josh Jobe. Josh Jobe you could make an argument Josh Jobe was a top 20 cornerback in the NFL the last 8 weeks of the season. If you look at a number of metrics, now Pro Football Focus doesn't agree with me. They gave him like a 50-something grade, but sorry, I don't agree with you guys. Josh Jobe, and what I liked about him also is he had the hard hat mentality. He comes up and he sticks people. There's a play that just keeps playing in my mind. It was that second game in San Francisco. And I think it was Brock Purdy's first completion of the game. Throws it to Deebo Samuel, who, you know how many tackles that guy's, he's probably got half his career broken tackles against the Seattle Seahawks. He just killed his team with yards after the catch. Josh Jobe wrapped him up and stuck him and dropped him right to the ground. That play jumped out to me like that is what you want at that other outside cornerback position. I think Pete Carroll, if he had Josh Jobe, Pete Carroll would have been just salivating because he loved corners that came up and tackled people.
Yeah.
Josh Jobe fits that mold. I think Josh Jobe is your starter across from Reek Woolen next year to open the season. And then I think Witherspoon, kind of that do-it-all, can play in the slot, can play outside. And maybe I think Nehemiah Pritchett with a offseason development, I think there's still enough traits there that he could be something. And I would re-sign Artie Burns. He's going to be veteran minimum. Nobody's going to – I would re-sign him. I know he's had some injuries, but he plays well every time he gets in the lineup.
Yeah.
Trey Brown is the one that I would move on from because there's just been injuries. And quite frankly, he didn't play well this year. End of story.
Cannot say enough good things about Doer, built for doing, lifestyle apparel for all occasions. I am a huge fan of their clothing. I didn't even know who they were until they came into my world, and now I cannot speak highly enough about them. Everything they make is from sustainable materials, breathable, antibacterial, but they are built to last, built for doing. Those are their stretch performance jeans. Huge fan of those. I wear them almost every day. They have 20% stretch, but the moment you take them out of the package, how strong they are. They really are built for doing. I've got a couple of these moleskin shirts, incredibly soft, very comfortable, very versatile. You can use them in a number of different applications. You will not regret checking this out. And right now, if you head over to shopdoer.com, that's shopdoer.com/forever, you can get 20% off your first order. That's shopdoer.com/forever for 20% off. Offensive side of the ball, we gotta talk about the offensive line, right? That's going to be the key storyline, one of the biggest ones anyway, heading into this offseason. You know, if you look out there already, the fans want us to draft 4 offensive linemen in the first 4 rounds this year. And, you know, despite that being a terrible idea of how to build an offensive line, let me ask it to you this way to start with, because we can all assume, we hope to goodness, that Laken Tomlinson's not back. It was a 1-year deal, started every game at left guard, gave him leadership in the locker room. That's what they were looking for. 32 years old. He's in decline. He's gone. Assuming that. Charles Cross, Olu Oluwatimi Sataolamea, Abe Lucas. Those were the 4 that started alongside Tomlinson for basically the last 6-7 games. They finally got some continuity there, and those guys got a chance to play together. Of those 4, how many of them are starting the first game next year?
3 of them.
Okay.
I think the only one that's not starting is Sataolamea. And look, there's a path for him to get back in the lineup, because I thought the pass protection was abysmal a lot of the time. You could tell that the athleticism was getting to him. There was some fundamental stuff. You can improve that, though. His run blocking was fantastic the last 5 games. He, to me, was the catalyst for them averaging those 5 yards per carry. The dude dished pancakes out. He was physical at the line of scrimmage. Like, you at least saw something there, which you didn't feel like you saw that with Anthony Bradford. Christian Haynes and his limited action, you didn't see that flash like, oh, there's some upside. At least with Lamea, you saw some of that in the run blocking. So I think that him and Haynes and Bradford, they're all going to be on the roster when the season gets going for training camp. I don't know how many of those guys are actually on the roster, but I am just going to make this statement. John Schneider has got to reallocate his funds. He has refused to do this over the years, but take the money for Draymond Jones, maybe for Noah Fant. Take that money and put it into a position that you claimed last year was overdrafted and overpaid. You need to go out and get a guard. And the one I'm going to opine for here, Trey Smith from the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't care if it takes $18 million a year to get him. The dude is a baller.
He might take 25.
Fantastic offensive lineman. Go put money into the trenches for somebody that is a proven and still young asset in Trey Smith. I am going and I'm doing that all day long. And if somebody puts 20 million up, I'm putting 20 million up. And you can say, well, who are you going to get rid of? You got to allocate your funds differently. This paying $70 million for wide receivers and having 4th string defensive linemen that are making $17 million a year, you need to put money in the offensive line. You have refused to do that for more than a decade, and we've seen the results. If you put Trey Smith in this offensive line next to Timmy and Abe Lucas, and then maybe you have either Lamea or Haynes at the other guard spot, and then Charles Cross at left tackle, I think that could go from being one of the worst lines in the league this year to being at least a mid-level, which to me, that's all they need. If this is an average offensive line, the Seahawks can score 26, 27 points a game with the other pieces they have. But you've got to allocate money. Instead of, and I'm not saying spend $8 million for a Luke Jokel. No, that is not spending money. That is burning money. Yeah. You need to go out and buy somebody that's actually a legitimate all-pro caliber player, which that's what Trey Smith is. And there's going to be a few other guys, I think, that hit the market that you could spend some money on. But that's the one I'm saying. I know John Schneider doesn't like to go for big fish, but that is the type of big fish you should spend money on in free agency.
So perfect segue. I want to talk about John Schneider, how hot you think his seat is. And I want to do this first. Let me put another tweet up. Greg Bell reported this. He had Hugh Millen on with him on KJR. And this is what Hugh said about John Schneider. To me, he's the Aaron Rodgers of general managers. He was great once, but he's a shadow of what he once was. Ryan Grubb is absorbing the failure of the offensive line. We talked about Mike Macdonald and his approach and what you've seen from him and how doggedly determined he is to get the result he wants, to play the style of football he wants, and how he's made that known. He cleaned out his linebacker room over it. Now he's gotten rid of an offensive coordinator that, by all other accounts, there was no personal conflict. Like they got along. They just didn't see eye to eye coaching wise. For all of the doubters that say, again, I'm going to ask you to try to talk some people off the ledge here, and maybe you won't be able to. I'm interested to hear your answer to this. That say John Schneider, he's never paid attention to the offensive line. He's been quoted as saying they get overdrafted and overpaid. He just said a couple weeks ago we don't lean heavily into free agency. all of those things. But can't we expect, based on what you've told us about Mike Macdonald, that he's going to march into John Schneider's office, if he hasn't already, and say, give me an offensive line so I can play the kind of football I want to play?
I guarantee that it's already happened, because the fact of the matter is John Schneider would have had to go with those linebacker moves. And Mike Macdonald was pulling those strings. And Mike Macdonald knows his linebackers. So he went in, I want Ernest Jones. Go get him for me. Or I want to play Tyrese Knight. It's time to move on from Tyrell Dodson, who you signed in free agency. So there's already been some of that give and take going on. So look, maybe Pete Carroll was completely on board with that, but I think Mike Macdonald is going to come in and say, I want some of this money put in.
Sorry.
You look at the Baltimore Ravens, where Mike Macdonald came from. They have invested big money on the offensive line in the past. Like, they've dished out big contracts to retain guys that they've developed. They have spent money on their offensive line. He is going to want that to happen. So I'm not trying to give Seahawks fans hope, because John Schneider may very well stick with the status quo and say, I don't play games that way. But look, you showed you can spend money in free agency. And if John Schneider wants an example that changing your ways could be a good thing, look no further than his former employer, the Green Bay Packers. The two big free agency additions that they made this year, they brought in Xavier McKinney at the safety position and Josh Jacobs at the running back position. Both all-pro. I believe both of them were voted all-pro players this year. They are dynamic additions. The Packers have changed their ways. This is no longer the Ted Thompson and we just sit out free agency. They go get players to improve. John Schneider's got to do that with the offensive line, because the stuff they've done, their strategy they've done the last 10 plus years, it is not working. And I can't see Mike Macdonald being okay with that right now.
Well, and another of his former employers, the Kansas City Chiefs, would be a good place to look too. They struggled. They had that Super Bowl 4 years ago where they struggled so mightily on the offensive line. They go out and they clean that room out in the offseason. They draft Creed Humphrey. They sign Joe Thuney. Oh, by the way, both of those guys just got voted to the first team All-Pro this year. It can be done, right? And you would think that he would want to
spend money at an important position, Dan. Yeah. I'm tired of hearing that guard is not, it's overdraft. No, if anything, you got to go out and get that stud, because there are so few of them. Go get one of them and spend the money. I guarantee you see a ripple effect positively on the rest of your offense doing that.
And not that he operates giving a damn about what people think and say about him, right? He obviously doesn't. Like you said, he had to know by okaying trading Jerome Baker and releasing Terrell Dodson, it made him look bad. Those were his choices, his signings in the offseason, right? So maybe on that level, he doesn't care. But I would think that this is such a huge need that literally is keeping this team from being one that we can legitimately talk about as a team that could do damage in the playoffs, that it's something he's going to want to address early, I would think.
I would think he's got to pull the trigger in free agency. And look, you were willing to spend money on Draymond Jones, who by all accounts was a good but not great player coming from Denver. They were interested in Zach Allen. My understanding is Zach Allen was actually who they wanted more than Draymond Jones, but the price tag went above what they wanted.
First team All-Pro.
Yeah, first team All-Pro. So the judgment there was correct, because they wanted him, but spend a little bit more money on that guy. Who knows what that means? But the Seahawks have made the moves on defense. You got to go spend some of that money on a truly proven offensive lineman, and not one that's 34 years old. I'm saying go splurge, whatever word you want to use. To me, it's going to be just like when you spent this money on Leonard Williams, when everybody's like, oh, that's $20 million. Why would I do that? That looks like a damn steal right now. If you bring in a guard like a Trey Smith that plays at an all-pro level for you, and you're paying him $18-19 million, and it's making the entire rest of your offensive line play better, how is that going to impact Geno Smith and Ken Walker III, Zach Charbonnet, you receivers? Like, all those guys now are going to look like bargains because they're playing to their talent level. I just think there's nothing that would have more of a positive domino effect than going out and buying a really good offensive lineman, because you haven't been able to draft and develop guys. Go get somebody that already is proven, bring him in, and make sure that you get this offense playing to the level. And 19th in scoring from this unit. They didn't have that many injuries either. It's inexcusable. And that's another reason Ryan Grubb is on the unemployment line right now.
Maybe you've touched on something that does give hope to fans that are skeptical that John Schneider can change his ways, because they used to operate in a similar manner on the defensive line. Hear me out. They traded Frank Clark because they didn't want to pay him $20 million a year. They couldn't pay Sheldon Richardson to keep him. They didn't want to pay Jadeveon Clowney to keep him. Now they've gone out, handed out the largest free agent contract they've ever signed anyone to, and Draymond Jones a couple of years ago. They gave Leonard Williams his $20 million. Maybe this is the year he finally realizes, I need to do that on offense. And by the way, as you mentioned, there's an opportunity to do that. You can almost literally swap Draymond Jones cap savings for an elite guard.
Yep, exactly. That's all you've got to do. And you're not probably going to have Tyler Lockett's contract on the books either. Like, there are a number of contracts, and I am more confident that Seattle can go out and get another receiver to plug in there in the draft than I am that they're going to be able to get a guard that's going to be able to come in and play at a high level right away. We've seen enough proof in the pudding there. So go spend your money on a position that is extremely important, far more important than your GM has said that it is, or at least has inferred that it is. You got to go spend that money. And I guarantee this offense is much better making one move like that and how it has a positive ripple effect on everybody.
I know nobody probably is interested in this, but we should probably talk about the quarterback, I guess, at some point, right? It's a thing, right?
Unfortunately.
Where do you currently stand? I know where you stand on how you feel about Geno as a player and his value, especially relative to potential options that are out there if you move on from him. But what does your gut tell you today, or even maybe some things that you're hearing? What do you think is, given the big picture, right? Zooming out and looking at not just 2025, what do you think John Schneider is going to do about Geno Smith this offseason?
So I think that there's one big domino that is going to have to fall before this decision is made ultimately. That's who's your offensive coordinator. Because if you bring in somebody like Klint Kubiak, I think Klint Kubiak is going to be pounding the table for Geno Smith to be back. Because look what he did with Kirk Cousins in 2021. When Derek Carr was healthy and had healthy receivers, what they were doing. Klint Kubiak wants to have a veteran quarterback that can make all the throws and can make all the reads. Geno Smith can do that. So in that case, I think that Geno Smith coming back and even extending him, I think it becomes a home run for the Seattle Seahawks. The issue is if you end up hiring somebody who wants to go a different direction at quarterback, none of the three guys that we've posted that have interviews lined up or have been requested, I don't think any of those three would be anti-Geno Smith. I don't think that any of those guys would feel that way. But if you end up interviewing a coordinator, it's like, hey, I have a quarterback that I'm interested in. Let's say that you have somebody that worked with Justin Fields previously, just as an example. I'm not saying I want them to go out and get Justin Fields, but if you have a coordinator that worked with them previously, like, I still think that there's upside there. You could bring Justin Fields in, and maybe that complicates things with Geno Smith. You know, that's really the domino that has to fall there. But based on the discussions I've had, and look, I get that fans are always wanting to reach on things, but Mike Macdonald is pretty straight. He's a pretty straight arrow on everything. Like, how many times this year do we hear him give not so enthusiastic reports on players and then turn around and bench them? Like, we saw it with Trey Brown. We saw it at several other positions. And he had guys like Kobe Bryant that he was raving about and eventually gets in the starting lineup. And, I'm just going to keep that guy in there. Like, He's a pretty straight shooter on things. I look at his comments on Geno Smith throughout the year. I think he loves Geno Smith. I think he values his veteran leadership. I think he values his ability to make gold out of turds. I mean, I think he values the things that make Geno Smith a quality starting quarterback. And I don't think that he is going to be rushing to John Schneider's office to say, I'd like to get a different quarterback. Drafting one on day 3 makes some sense. The name that is, if Kyle McCord is there in the 4th round or even the 3rd round, I would consider going that path, not believing that I'm starting in year 1, because I'm not.
Right.
But a guy that has maybe the highest highs of any quarterback in this class when you're watching film. The problem is the lows are really, really low. But a guy like that drafting and trying to develop with a new offensive coordinator and a new quarterback coach would make some sense. But if you think that there is a better option, I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me a better option than starting Geno Smith. I have yet to hear one, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's it. I do the same thing. I hear you. I'm on your side. It drives me crazy that people want to. The word "just" is a huge pet peeve of mine. And it's a tremendous minimizer. I don't think people realize when they use that word how much they're minimizing what comes after it. But the just cut Geno Smith because we need the money or because he's not good, that's not how the NFL works. That's how you end up being the New York Giants, Cleveland Browns, and you're just constantly every year the New York Jets chasing quarterbacks. It's frustrating, I know, because everybody wants the shiny. They want the Ferrari, right? They want the young, flashy quarterback on a rookie contract. We all want.
But who are you getting this year that's going to fill that void?
No, the Giants are third, and they're not going to get one of those guys. I mean, there's only two, right? It's there's buzz about Jackson Dart moving into the first round, whatever.
I'd have reservations about that. I know he played well in the bowl game, but you got to watch every game. Like, he's a day 3 guy.
How about this, right? Because the Seahawks have seen this work in the past. When Mike Holmgren came over, he made the trade for Matt Hasselbeck. It's been a while, I feel like. Off the top of my head, as I sit here right now, I can't think of an example, but it's been a while since some team has found a young quarterback who was stuck on a roster, right? And he turned out to be a long-term starter, an answer at the position. Are there any of those guys kind of hidden around the league somewhere that might be attainable?
To be honest, Dan, there's nobody that's jumping out to me that I'm like, that would be a
Hooker
guy
gets a lot of love.
To me, Sam Howell was the top candidate last year for that, and we've seen what he's looked like since the Seahawks brought him in. Like, that was one of the worst performances I've ever seen by an NFL quarterback. The way he played in that Green Bay game,
that was bad.
And he just looked like deer in the headlights. I have no idea what I'm doing, which I can't believe that because I thought his film in Washington was pretty decent.
Yeah, same.
But my point is, I don't see anybody that's going to be better than Sam Howell that you can go trade for right now that is going to be able to push Geno Smith. Like, there just isn't. And somebody says Justin Fields again, I'm like, he's a free agent first off, and he's been benched by 2 teams. I don't care what anybody says. The Steelers benched him. Like, if he had really won that job, he would have stayed in the starting lineup, but they benched him for Russell Wilson. So, and Russell Wilson has played terrible the last 4 or 5 weeks. Like, they could have gone back to Justin Fields if they wanted to, and they have not. So Kirk Cousins, he used to be a statue, and now he's got cement feet. Like, that is not somebody was arguing with me the other day. We only have to pay him veteran minimum because the Falcons, I'm not paying him 50 cents to play quarterback for me next year with what I watched this season. He cannot move. He can't run play action effectively because he can't move. He's had a great career. I would stay away from him at all costs. Even if Sam Darnold hits the free agent market, which I don't think he's going to.
Yeah.
But if he hits the free agent market, I'd be having my reservations. Like, I'm putting him with somebody other than Kevin O'Connell. I'm putting him behind a much worse offensive line, at least on paper right now. Am I going to see the Sam Darnold from last year, or I'm going to see the one that played in New York and Carolina? I would have reservations about that. Like, if you think Geno Smith's regressed, what do you think Sam Darnold's going to do in those kind of circumstances? I'm not paying him $45-50 million. I'm paying Geno Smith that money way before I'm paying Sam Darnold. And that's my opinion on all this. I just don't know who the quarterback is going to be. And like, somebody was telling me the other day, maybe Aaron Rodgers. I'm like, first off, what have you been watching? And why would any Seahawks fan want Aaron Rodgers in a Seahawks uniform? Yeah. And that's not going to solve your long-term thing. He's 41 years old. Like, I just don't get it. I don't get it, Dan. Like, if there was a better option, I'd entertain it. But I just, like, draft a guy on day 3. I'm totally fine with that. If you find a gem, excellent. But this is probably a class that's going to be pretty difficult to do. This is the worst quarterback class I've scouted in 12 years.
Oof. That's saying something considering 2021 happened.
At least 2021, that class didn't have the top talent. I think Sanders and Ward are better than anybody was in that group.
Yeah, I think there was more Pickett, right, in the first round. Yeah, there
was more depth in terms of guys that went in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. Like, Malik Willis has played. That's the one name that I was going to mention to you. If you have a coach that you're confident can coach him properly, the way that Matt LaFleur has in Green Bay, Malik Willis has played really good football every time he's been in the lineup for Green Bay this year. That guy is still only, I think, 25 years old.
Is he on an expiring deal, or does he have 1 year left?
I think he's got 1 year left.
So he's got 1 year left. Yeah,
last year was his 3rd season.
If that would be,
I'm not saying he's going to be better than Geno Smith, because I don't believe that.
Right.
But it's a guy to take a swing on. So I don't think Green Bay would move him. I think Matt LaFleur likes it. In fact, that Jordan Love had injuries several times this year. Like, I want to have a good backup quarterback, but That's just telling you where we're at in terms of trying to find somebody better than Geno Smith. It does not exist. Fix the damn offensive line and let Geno Smith play to his capabilities. That's my solution.
It really goes to show how much context and situation and coaching matters. Like, I thought Malik Willis, fans have been kind of clamoring him for a while, ever since he was tied to the Seahawks when they had the 9th pick the year he was coming out, and some had him mocked that high. I thought his tape in Tennessee was so bad that I didn't want to touch him under any circumstances. And then you watch, he's a different player in Green Bay.
Coaching matters.
Yeah,
it is. I've seen some people like, well, it's just the Joes on the field. No, you got to have good coaching to win in the NFL.
And the Howell thing blows me away, because it's not like, if anyone wants to again condemn John Schneider for making that move because Howell hasn't looked that good. Remember, there were reportedly 2 other teams that were hot after him and negotiating to make trades, which is why Schneider had to offer a little bit more. And those
good tape.
It was Sean Payton and Sean McVay were the 2 guys that were trying to acquire Sam Howell. That should say something about what they thought, they were getting coming out of that year in Washington, for sure. Final note, let's end on this as we look ahead to 2025. At least one piece of what could potentially be good news: a little bit of a more favorable schedule, playing the AFC South. There's some cool matchups here. Anything stand out to you on how the opponents look for next year?
Well, you obviously have your normal divisional matchups. I'm really excited to see Geno Smith or whoever's playing quarterback for the Seahawks against Michael Penix in that Falcons game. You're not going to get the Ryan Grubb game this time around, since he's no longer the offensive coordinator. You might have a Russell Wilson rematch. Who knows if Pittsburgh's going to bring him back? And Tennessee, like Shedeur Sanders going to the Titans, like that's suddenly going to be a big ticket item. So playing them in Nashville, and then Jaden Daniels. And there's a lot of away games that excite me on that schedule.
I wish this was flip-flopped, because we're going to miss out on potentially a Russell Wilson reunion. We're going to miss out potentially on Bobby Wagner coming. It's a shame that those are road games.
Yeah, but it's still there's several. Look, I'm going to make this prediction right now. I think the team from this crop of teams the Seahawks are playing that's going to be a playoff team next year that didn't make the playoffs this year, the Carolina Panthers.
Okay.
If you watch them the last 5 or 6 weeks, they might not have been winning a lot of games, but it's crazy what confidence does. Bryce Young looks what Dave Canales has done with quarterbacks. I think Dave Canales is as good of a quarterback coach as any in the NFL. Look what he did with Geno last year with Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield's career completely turned around. And then Bryce Young, who got benched early in the year, the dude's just throwing touchdown after touchdown. He led the NFL in big-time throws from week 8 on.
Yeah, he looked
Dave Canales knows what he's doing, and Carolina still has a lot of holes. They can plug those in free agency in the draft, and that is not a division that's going to be difficult to climb. I think Carolina is going to be a tough matchup on the road next year for Seattle.
Kind of feels like Jacksonville has an opportunity too if they hire the right guy.
Yeah, well, that's the key. Do you get a Dave Canales that can come in and coach up Trevor Lawrence and maximize, and you still got Trent Baalke as your GM? So
yeah, that's crazy. I wonder if that would be ultimately something that would keep Ben Johnson from taking that job. Maybe.
I think Ben Johnson would want his own general manager. I think that, and we've seen it the last 2 years, he's not taking a head coaching job unless it's all the circumstances that he wants. And that's how you should do it. Otherwise, just sit in your comfy spot as the OC in Detroit.
Do you think is Pete Carroll a legitimate option in Chicago? Do you think that's real consideration there?
I don't think he's a legitimate candidate in Chicago. I think he is the favorite in Las Vegas.
Oh, I had not heard that.
He is interviewing with the Raiders. Is there a coach that would be better fit for the Sin City than Pete Carroll? And look,
Mike McDonald
doesn't work out a lot of the time, but Mark Davis is just like his dad. He likes those splashy, eccentric personalities. That's exactly what you'd be getting with Pete Carroll. So I'm not going to sit here and say that it absolutely happens, but I think if he gets a head coaching job, it's going to be with the Raiders where he can go get his own quarterback.
Do you think he's at the point in his career where he would have to hire a strong DC and kind of give him some autonomy?
I think he would. Back? Yeah. I think at this stage of his career, I think he still knows defense, but I think you've got to have a good coordinator to run that side of the ball.
How about a Pete Carroll, Robert Saleh combo?
Hey, Saleh was on Seattle staff with Pete Carroll for a brief while. If he doesn't go back to
from USC, right? Yeah.
If he doesn't go back to San Francisco, which they just interviewed him, I think that's probably where he ends up. But that'd be a team that, because I think Robert Saleh absolutely got. I think he got ripped off in New York. Like you saw what the Jets did after they fired him. Like that team just imploded. Yeah. So I think Robert Saleh and Pete Carroll together in Vegas, get a quarterback. That would be a fun team.
Getting the quarterback's the hard part. Maybe he trades for Geno. Wait, we could take this Raiders thing a whole crazy direction. And he could hire Geno Gruden as his
Seahawks are doing that, though. Does that, I mean, are they telling the Raiders, hey, we want your first round pick? You know, and then Seattle might be able to work up. If you want to get Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward, you can move up and get that guy. Yeah, we're going down a alternative universe,
right? I think it's an idea for a late night episode here.
It sounds like it to me. An alternate universe. It sounds like a Marvel thing.
Today on Raiders Forever, Max Crosby traded to Seattle for Geno.
Now we're adding Max Crosby to it. Okay.
You know what? I'll take Michael Mayer in a second. How about that?
Well, because they're not going to trade Brock Bowers. I can say you already got Michael Mayer. We'll take Brock Bowers off your hands.
You don't need him.
You don't need him. You got a quarterback now. You don't need him. No.
All right.
I think it sounds like a fun. That sounds like a fun, like alternative universe type thing. But yeah. Pete Carroll and Geno reuniting in Vegas. Roll the dice, baby. That would be interesting.
It's always good to have you on. That's an hour, and we could easily talk for another hour. But I know you got to go. You got Locked On Seahawks and all Seahawks to do. What do you focus as you slide into the offseason now, other than breaking news and reacting to things that are happening on a daily basis? Like what's your approach in your content kind of kicking off the offseason?
I just normally like to get, like today I got my rookie grade card out. I'll start doing position grade cards tomorrow, some awards, some of those type of things. And then I start diving into the free agency, and I've already been scouting. Again, I've watched a lot of tape on all the quarterback class. Yeah. I think that it's awful for the most part, but start to get into the draft stuff. So you know how it goes. The NFL, there really isn't an off season. So
yeah, unfortunately that quarterback class got weaker in the last 24 hours too. Carson Beck, regardless of what
I'm going to make a counter argument. I think overall it's better. I don't think Carson Beck is a good quarterback. That's
well, no, I agree, but just, it only takes one team,
it's
right?
It's just one of those things, any number that gets pulled, it's already bad,
And it sure seems like, despite some buzz last week, it seems like after last night, Drew Aller probably is not trending up.
Well, I have never been a big Aller fan. I see Will Levis 2.0, and we've seen how that's gone in Tennessee. I see a lot of the same traits, same poor decision-making. So we'll see. I think going back to school was the only thing he could do. Maybe next year I'll feel differently, but I think you saw in the game last night, some of the mistakes he makes, like that. It's hard for me to be buying him as a first round type guy.
Yeah. All right, my friend. Well, thank you very much. That's Corbin Smith. Appreciate it. We'll have you back again sooner than we even realize. We'll talk some draft coming up soon.
Sounds good, man. Thanks.
All right, man. See you. All right, you guys. What'd you think? Let me know in the comments below what you liked about what Corbin had to say, what you didn't like. And I'll say this, like I mentioned at the end of the conversation, we talked for an hour. Can't get to everything every time. I know we didn't talk about DK Metcalf. He mentioned Tyler Lockett. We didn't really dive into his situation and his comments that he wants to keep playing. We got to spread some of that out, right? And apologies again for a couple of days ago. Wasn't able to have Brian Nemhauser, Hawk Blogger, on the show. We both weren't feeling well that morning. We're going to reschedule for next week. I'm going to be out of town for a couple of days, Sunday through Wednesday, getting some sunshine in Arizona with my lady. But if there's any breaking news, if an offensive coordinator, for instance, is hired while I'm gone, or another unexpected big personnel move, I will be in a position where I'll be able to react to it from there. And then in a couple of weeks, headed to the Senior Bowl in Mobile. Thank you so much to those of you who contributed to that. Can't wait to get down there and cover the biggest event of the draft cycle. And we're hearing this may be the best Senior Bowl class ever because of the underclassmen that are now declaring and being allowed to play in the Senior Bowl. That only started happening last year. Can't wait to see all that talent down there. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. And remember to subscribe to this channel. Thanks to BetUS for sponsoring this episode. Until next time, forever and always, go Hawks.